Hello, welcome back. I didn't expect to see you, in such a circumstance, but here we go. All right, welcome to our first online lesson. Today we are going to talk about the different invasions into the United Kingdom, and you will be able to see the impacts of, these different groups of people on the formation of the British culture. So here we go. Let's explore the different invasion. So let's talk about the prehistory period. Now, the United Kingdom actually is located on a group of islands called British Isles. It has been populated by human beings for hundreds of thousands of years. And human beings have been living in Britain for about 750,000 years, at least according to a lot of archaeological evidence. Now, for most of that time, they subsisted, means, they survived by gathering food like nuts and berries and leaves and fruits from wild sources. They would go into the woods or, go to the seas and just gathered the food. And of course, by hunting. And, this is just like any other tribal society back in the days when there was the sort of like division of labor in among members of a particular group. And then after that we moved to a thing called the continental Britain. So nowadays you will see that it is an island, right? It is separated from Europe through the British Channel. But back in the days, Britain was a part of the continent of Europe until the end of the last ice age, from approximately 110,000 to 10,000 years ago. So what happened was that over the millennia, there were phases of extreme cold when large areas of Britain were covered in ice. And this somehow was followed by warmer periods. And you will see that around 10,000 years ago, the last ice age came to an end because, when the weather became warmer, the ice started to melt, right? And so sea levels rose as the ice sheets melted. And of course, Britain became separated from European mainly shortly before 6000 BC. So as you could imagine, when the ice melted, you would have a lot of water rising, and somehow it flooded the area between, Britain and Europe, and that's why you have, Britain nowadays as a group of islands. So now we have the first invaders. They were the Iberians. And these people basically came from the civilization from the Mediterranean by way of the Atlantic coast of Portugal, Spain, and France. This somehow happened between 2500 and 2000 BC and spread all along the west coast of Britain and Ireland. Now, the Iberian people, they left behind a great monuments, great number of monuments in stones or the megaliths, and such as the Stonehenge, a very, very important landmark in the UK. And of course, this is Salisbury Plain. Um, Now, this is a very mysterious sort of like architectural structure, and there have been a lot of questions relating to the purpose of Stonehenge, but it probably was a place of worship and an astronomical observatory made of giant stones. Now, you know that, for example, here in Vietnam, back in the days, of course, we didn't have, the watches or the clocks or stuff like that. And you would use, things like trees or maybe other things in nature in order to observe, the climate or the weather and, the time during the day. So somehow people believe that Stonehenge was used with the same purpose. Um, and lately, archaeologists have established that the stones were somehow transported by sea from Wales. Now, after the Iberians, and then you have the Celts or the Celts, there are two different ways to pronounce this word. And they reached Britain from about 2000 BC onwards, coming from Central Europe and penetrating the island mainly from the south and east. These were the Britons, who were organized like warlike tribes and were very well advanced in craftsmanship, but rather backward in agriculture. And among the most influential Celts were the Druids, who administered religion, justice, and education of the young. The Celts worshipped the natural elements, such as the sun, the moon, the trees, and the rivers. I wouldn't call this as a religion, but this is a form of worship somehow, because there were not so many rituals involved, or not a lot of organizations as a lot, like modern religions such as Christianity or Buddhism nowadays. But somehow it was sort of like a kind of spiritual activity. And water was regarded as a holy element which generated life and was the door to the world after death. So, just like Catholic people or Christian people, they believe that there is heaven. So the Celts people also believed that there would be life after death. And in order for you to be able to enter, that world, then water is something that was very essential in that sense. So let me move on to the next invasion. Sorry, somehow we have some kind of technical issue here. Here we go. Now, the Celtic people were also a group of people who had very, very great arts legacy. Of course, they lacked no literary productions, but they did leave a lot of artifacts. And some of the things here, and I'm talking from, a top down. First of all is the Cockburn sword from a barrier at Cockburn at Yorkshire, England. And this is probably the finest iron age sword in Europe, And like I said earlier, these people were war tribes. They would go and fight. And of course, the weapon or the situation sword was something that was very, very special and very, very essential. Now, number two is the battle sea shield. Now, a shield A shield is something for you to protect yourself, you know. So when you use a sword, um, you have to be able to cover yourself with this. And so this is something that was also vital, you know. And the Battersea shield was one of the most significant pieces of ancient Celtic art and dated to 350 to 50 BC. It was found in the River Thames Battersea Bridge, London, England. Now, number 3 is the Tara Bridge. This is from Ireland and dates from the 8th century, about 700 AD. It is generally considered to be the most impressive of over 50 elaborate Irish bridges. Now, you know the bridges, right? This is for women, you know, to put it on their hair, okay, as a form of ornament, a form of accessory, if you will. And this is a very interesting thing because, you know, much warlike as they used to be, the Celtic people also appear to be very romantic. You know, they would go out and fight, but at the same time, they would also take a very good care of their wives or their girlfriends back home. Okay. And the last artifact that I'm mentioning here is the Wandsworth shield. It is a circular bronze iron age shield that was found in the River of Thames in Wandsworth in London. And of course, you know, just like the Battersea shield, it was used, of course, to protect, you know, the warriors from being attacked. You also have some English written records, and this is a casket, you know, left by the Anglo-Saxon invaders, which I will be talking, you know, later, a little bit later. Now, so far we have the Iberian and we have the Celtic people, and so the third group of people who invaded, you know, Great Britain was the Roman. And the invasion was led by one of the famous, you know, the most famous generals or warrior, the Gaius Caesar, okay, who basically crossed the channel with his legions, enriched the themes and reduced the inhabitants to the allegiance of Rome. But the legion was really conquered in the years of 43 to 47 AD under Emperor Claudius. Now, the Romans brought their culture and language with them. Now, if anything that you know about the Roman, then it would be, you know, the spirit of spreading their own civilization. And so along with the culture and language, of course, they built the towns and they connected them with a radical system of roads. So the British people nowadays enjoy a very good, gravelled, you know, very, very sort of like stable system of road. And this was thanks to the Roman. Now, many of the cities today, like London or Bath or Colchester, Gloucester or Chester, were founded by the Romans. Now, all the streets were paved and drained with pavements for foot passengers, and houses had central heating and often a water supply. Now, the Roman people were highly civilized, as you know. Back in those days, as you could see, they already had central heating and they had already had like running water, which of course, you know, are great indicators of a civilized society. Now, there were 3 different kinds of towns. The coloniae, inhabited by the Roman settlers. So, you know, they didn't really mingle with the people in the UK back in the days. They would separate themselves in the colony. And then you have another kind of town, which was called the municipia. And of course, you know, these other towns that were inhabited by not by the Roman people, but by the British people back in the days, but they were given citizenship. And then the third kind of towns were the civitas, which were the old Celtic tribal capitals. Now, these people were not given the citizenship, right? They would remain to be Celtic, or they would remain to be, by Iberian. And many of these towns were originally army camps, and the Latin name Castra has remained in many modern town names ending in Castor or Chester, such as Lancaster, Gloucester, or Manchester. In 120 AD, Emperor Hadrian ordered a wall called the Wallum Hadrani to be built to mark the border between the conquered Britons and the Scots and Picts of Caledonia, now Scotland, in the north. And of course, the Hadrian Wall has also become a very interesting and very, very famous landmark in the UK. And here we go. We have the Anglo-Saxon invasion. Just to tell you something, English, of course, as you could see, right. I mean, I'm talking about the language itself. Originates from different kinds of language, but somehow the Anglo-Saxon had the most important impact, in the formation of this language. And, later, I will try to explain that. So in the 4th century, the Roman Empire began to collapse. And by the end of the century, the Roman legions had been withdrawn as they were needed to defend Italy itself. And the defense of the islands from Germanic invaders was left in the hands of the Romanized Britons, who had no military training. As you could see, the Roman people back in the days didn't really transfer all the skills and everything needed in order to defend a country. So the struggle for survival was carried on successfully for about 150 years and spawned the legend of King Arthur, probably a Romanized Briton, Artorius, and his Knights of the Round Table. Now, this is a very legendary king, and as you could see, there have been a lot of movies and films made about him. And if you have an opportunity, look for the word King Arthur on Google, and you will probably come across, some of the very famous movies made, about this character. Although, to be honest with you, it's quite disappointing that there is no historical evidence of its truth. So in the 5th century, 3 Germanic tribes, the Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes came by sea. According to tradition, their settlements started in 449 AD. Now, these tribes were racially akin. It means that, they had similar appearance, similar skin tones, similar languages. You have like Germanic dialects. And religion, they were paganism. It means that they didn't really follow like one particular god. They would worship like a lot of things. And of course, literature. Now, they have a very, very famous, epic poem called Beowulf. Later when you study British literature or English literature, you will have an opportunity to learn about this epic poem. So this section I will be talking about the way that they organized their kingdom. So among the 3 tribes, the 3 groups, the Jews probably were the first to come to Britain about 450 AD, and they founded the Kingdom of Kent. Now the Saxons followed and established the Kingdom of Sussex, the Wessex, Essex, and Mercia. So far you have 5 kingdoms. And then finally, You have the Angles founded East Anglia and Northumbria and gave their name to the country, right? So altogether, you have Kent by Joseph 1, Success 2, Wessex 3, Essex 4, Mercia 5, Anglia 6, and Northumbria 7. So that's why you have the heptarchy, in Latin, hepta means 7, right? So what happened, with the Britons? They either became serfs of the conquerors or fled to the mountainous west, where they resisted for over 150 years, and they called Welsh by the Anglo-Saxons. So, you have like Wales now, and you have the Welsh people. Actually, were the Britons, who lived in England nowadays. They had to flee the country when these invaders came. So the seven kingdoms were often at war with each other. As you could see, they would try to expand their territory, they would try to rise and, embrace the power and everything until the whole country was united under Egbert, king of Wessex. So Egbert tried to reorganize the Anglo-Saxon society. And so he would divide people into different classes. And of course, the highest was the king. And the king was elected by the written or council of wise men and chosen among members of the royal family, right? And then you have the earls, hereditary aristocracy, magistrates, and military troops of the shrines. So here, as you can see, they were the nobles, or they were high officials in the military, or in the religion. And then you have Danes, a little bit lower, and these people were high-ranking warriors. For example, you have people who are responsible for hunting, board, taxes, and administration of justice. And then you have the churls, were the peasants, farmers, and they were freemen. And of course, the lowest class in that society was the thralls, and they were slaves by birth, conquest, or purchase. So, a few characteristics of this society is that there were no private property, land was held in common, and farming based on the open field system. It means that, everybody could come and rent a piece of land in order to cultivate, in order to, grow their crops. Cattle rearing was very limited because no hay or feeding, for feeding animals. And but still they raised animals, and two very common kinds of animal were sheep and pigs. And sheep were kept for wool, wool, right? To make sweaters and to make things to cover ourselves. And then pigs for meat. They didn't have money, didn't have any kind of currency, and so you would, it would beg the question: so how did they basically do all the transactions and stuff? How did they buy food, and how did they buy things that they need? How did they sell it? Of course, just like any other societies back in those days, they would use a form of bartering. So, if you have like a sheep and you want like a pig, you would give the person the pig, and then you take the sheep, for example, right? So, like I said earlier, the Anglo-Saxons were paganist. It means that they worship like a lot of gods. So the most important deities, or gods of the Anglo-Saxons, were the god of war, and you call it too. The king of the gods, the name was Walden. He was also the god of death and battle. And then the god of thunder and lightning, is Thor, right? And so their names are commemorated in the names of 3 days in the week: Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Like Chu for Tuesday, right? Warden for Wednesday, and Thor for Thursday. Friday instead commemorate Frigg, that is the bride of Warden, and the goddess of love, marriage, and sexuality. So now you have Sunday and Monday, right? That is your responsibility to find out the origin of the different names, in English. Now, one last thing that I'm going to talk about in our lesson today is the Anglo-Saxon conversion to Christianity. So in 97, during the period of Anglo-Saxon power, Pope Gregory I, he sent Augustine to bring Christianity to England. And so you know that this is from the Roman people, right? And the Romans, by the way, have been, strong Catholics, hardcore, and they would try to spread their religion. And Augustine was a very, very, influential saint. Later he became saint. Were very, very influential. Like I said, he created a lot of impact whenever he went, and so that was why he was sent to, the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms back then by Pope Gregory I. However, it was the Celtic monks from small communities in Wales and Ireland who really brought Christianity to common people. So as you could imagine, you have Augustine coming and spreads the religion to the leaders, the people who were in power. And then later they trained the monks, and the monks would do, the misery, right? So the monasteries became important centers of culture where Latin was introduced once again. And the conversion of the English to Christianity was very, very important event because England thus re-established in contact with the Latin invasion. So for my next lecture, which I will be posting on Wednesday, we will be learning about Danish invasion. Okay, so for now, I think I will stop, the lecture, and then I'll get back to you on Wednesday. Now, see you until then. Bye bye.